So, this is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 4X, a very interesting smartphone. Whereas most manufacturers tend to incrementally upgrade their smartphones over time, every generation Xiaomi seems to take a bit of a sidestep. But here's why it's still an interesting proposition that you should definitely consider. Let's get into the full review. So, just like the Note 4 before it, the 4X is a well-built smartphone. It doesn't have quite the same heft as a flagship you might find in 2017, but nonetheless, considering the $150 you can pay for it, you're getting a pretty solid phone. It's made out of metal all the way around, it's got a single unibody finish, and these really nice chrome metal accents which I just dig. I think they add a nice feel of luxury without being too intrusive. And yeah, while Xiaomi may not have invested as much as Samsung or HTC in the design of their smartphones, they don't stand out amongst them. The build is really solid too. I mean, I've tried dropping it a couple of times, admittedly not on purpose, but it survived. And it's also got a nice little curve into the edges, which means it cups nicer in the hands than it might look on first impressions. It's a little bit on the thick side, but nothing out of the ordinary given its price point. It's not exactly the Galaxy S8 in terms of style. And in terms of the physical hardware, it's pretty much what you'd expect. We've got fingerprint scanner, volume rocker, and an on-off button. The only thing worth bearing in mind is the slightly sharp shape of the phone combined with the thickness of it makes it very difficult to use in one hand, but for the people buying a Note phone, I suppose you'd expect to not need to do that. In terms of the screen, you get about what you pay for. It's a 1080p IPS panel, not the sharpest, not the deepest blacks or the highest contrast, but nonetheless it's a pleasant viewing experience which is pretty colourful and bright enough to be viewed outdoors. It's also got a decent oleophobic coating on, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem with fingerprints. But under the hood, we now have the Snapdragon 625, which is technically speaking on paper, a less powerful chip than the Helio X20 used in last year's model. Now before you sort of shout and scream and jump up and down on your table, there's a couple of benefits to this. First of all, whilst the benchmark performance isn't as high, this is a very responsive chip. It's a chip that actually I'd say has less of an input lag time than I noticed on the Helio X20. Core gaming tasks do not perform as fast as on that chip. Admittedly, when the phone really focuses on one thing, you can definitely tell the difference. This will not play games at a smooth 60 frames per second like that chip would, but instead you might get something like a 30 frames per second. However, there are benefits. The responsiveness means apps open very quickly, the whole UI feels incredibly snappy. It supports international bands, so you can use this abroad, and it's also cooler and more efficient than the original processor, which means you get a longer battery life. But on the subject of battery, this guy blows it out the park. With between 4000 and 4100 mAh of juice, you essentially get about 11 to 12 hours of screen on time, or a good 2 full days of usage. Now the 13 megapixel camera sits somewhere around the upper end of what to expect at this price. It's not going to blow you out the water like, for example, the Google Pixel did when I first tried it, but it's a good camera. It creates good detail in good lighting conditions, and actually a decent level of bokeh too. We've got an f2.0 aperture here, which is not too shabby. It's also got a decent HDR capability, being able to capture both very highly exposed things and also very underexposed areas in the same shot. It also captures a really wide amount of colour in one shot, and the front camera isn't too bad either. Something else I notice is that the autofocus time has vastly improved from the previous model, and the shutter time is also faster. Unfortunately though, whilst a faster shutter time is usually associated with blur-free photos, that isn't really the case here. It's not terrible, but unfortunately even when it seems like you might have perfectly captured a moment, reviewing the photo later on reveals that it's still blurry in the shot. Now, the software on the Redmi Note 4X is pretty much what we've come to expect. It's running Android 6.0, which to be honest is a bit of a disappointment considering it's a 2017 phone, but nonetheless this is MIUI 8. It's a fast, responsive, developed and customizable ecosystem with some pretty nice pleasant inbuilt applications. It's a little bit childish to look at. I have to say I really don't like the playful design. Stock Android is always going to be my go-to. But nonetheless, they've started to bundle in some of the cooler features that other phones are using, such as dual apps, being able to duplicate applications so you can log in with different profiles. I've also been pretty impressed with the phone's fingerprint scanner. It's using 4th generation technology which detects the ridges of your fingerprint as well as the general shape, so it's more secure. It's very responsive, but also, more importantly, easy to reach. I think we all know a few companies who could learn from that. In terms of the speaker system, it hasn't really changed since the original Redmi Note 4, which is to say it's really not bad. It's a little bit louder and a little bit clearer than the Google Pixel XL. Vocals you'll hear fine through it, bass a little bit less so. So guys, that is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 4X, what I think to be a very interesting smartphone. In a fast evolving marketplace, it's always interesting to see a large company like Xiaomi taking an almost direct sidestep. Having said that, for the most part, these small little changes that have been made make using this phone on the day-to-day basis a far more pleasant experience. The trade-off between slightly lower gaming performance and improved battery, improved responsiveness, and a better camera, I think are generally warranted, and they add all of that into an already well-presented and well-built smartphone body. So guys, if you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate it if you smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That would really help me out. I would really appreciate it. So with that being said, I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.